All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is 9 a.m. Time to go ahead and get started. Before I introduce those individuals who will be speaking in our first plenary session this morning on regional collaboration and climate planning, just as a again, welcome to the 2021 annual conference of both the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association and the Nevada chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. Again, my name is Fred Steinman. I currently serve as the Northern Section Director for the Nevada APA, and I also am currently an assistant research professor with the College of Business at the University of Nevada. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First and foremost, tonight, I believe 6 p.m. Is our second of two social events. Thanks to the generous sponsorship of this social event by the Nevada Builders Alliance. At 6 p.m., we'll be having a cocktail reception in the Hall of Fame room across 4th Street / Center Street at the National Bowling Stadium. That'll be held in the Hall of Fame room. And after we welcome everyone, we'll actually have a short presentation from Patricia Herzog, Director of Rural Community and Economic Development with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, where she'll be talking about the state's Main Street program and the efforts of the Governor's Office of Economic Development to encourage urban revitalization and economic development in various rural communities throughout the state of Nevada. Of course, like last night's bowling event, each one of you are welcome to attend. Again, it'll start at 6 p.m. Be at the National Bowling Stadium. And if you haven't gotten your free drink tickets yet, please make sure that you pick them up at the conference registration sign-in check-in table in the pre-function lobby area of the ballroom. Also, as a reminder, both the Nevada APA and the Nevada ASLA are currently encouraging and begging and cajoling each of you to throw in a few dollars to support 2 scholarships that the Nevada APA currently administers and one that the Nevada ASLA sponsors as part of a larger raffle prize that we have put together. In addition to a bunch of University of Nevada, Reno swag proudly displayed at the registration sign-in and check-in table, you'll also be competing for 4 tickets to an upcoming UNR men's basketball game. 100% of all the proceeds of the raffle revenue we generate will be divided equally amongst the 3 scholarships. The first is the Alex Fittinghoff Scholarship, which the chapter administers through the University of Nevada, Reno. And the other one is the Robert Genser Scholarship that is administered by the chapter through the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And then an additional third of that revenue will be gifted to the Nevada ASLA for the support of their student scholarship. So it's 1 ticket for $5 or 5 for $20 or, even more than that. If you haven't purchased your raffle tickets or you'd like to purchase some additional ones, please make sure that you do purchase those raffle tickets at the conference registration check-in and sign-in table as we're trying to build these scholarship funds to really encourage students to pursue a professional career in planning and planning-related opportunities. With those housekeeping items out of the way, one last thing. Lunch today is, of course, on your own. And as usual, I encourage all of you to support local businesses and restaurants in the downtown core. And one additional thing, we do have one additional mobile session tour this afternoon. Actually, this morning at 10:45, it is the Midtown Virginia Street RTC project mobile session tour. If you are planning on attending that mobile session, again, please kind of form up in front of the registration check-in table in the pre-function lobby area about 5 minutes to, and that mobile session begins at 10:45. Unlike yesterday, for our Southern Nevada brothers and sisters, you won't have to suffer too much in the cold. That is fall time in Northern Nevada, as RTC of Washoe County will be providing bus transportation from the ballroom down to Midtown for you to check out. So again, do encourage you, if you haven't signed up for that one, to sign up, but try to form up about 5 minutes at 10:40 a.m. And of course, bottles of water will be provided. All right. Now, with all that housekeeping out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce our first plenary session for this morning. I'll begin by introducing kind of the MC of the panel, and then he will go on and introduce all the individual panelists. But it's my pleasure to introduce from the City of Las Vegas and a longtime serving member of the chapter's executive committee, Marco Vilada. Marco.
Thanks, Fred. Good morning, and again, welcome to day 2 PA ASLA State Conference. As we did yesterday with our equity panel, we're going to touch on topics today that that expand on some of what APA is getting into with their new CM program, ethics, law, and for this session, the first of a series of rotating topics, and this one on climate and sustainability. So for our AICP members, these topic-specific sessions will be mandatory requirements beginning next year. As professional organizations, we've been talking and hearing about climate change for some time now. And we hear it in the media, in politics, and much of the discussion shouldn't be news to anybody. Even though it rained and snowed yesterday and the seasons turned colder, we've had other not so pleasant climate wake-up calls over the past couple of months that have been noticeable to Nevada more than ever before. I want everyone to think about the place that we believe to be special or national treasures. So Tahoe is obviously one that's near and dear to Nevadans. It certainly is for me. For hundreds of generations, it was recognized as such by the Washoe. It was certainly recognized 160 years ago by members of the fledgling territorial government of Nevada, including the brother of the Secretary of State. While he also happened to accidentally set the Tahoe Basin on fire, he said of it, "The air up there is in the clouds is very pure and fine, bracing and delicious. And why shouldn't it be? It is the same the angels breathe." And that was said by Mark Twain. The same cannot be said this summer as we saw and some of us lived this apocalyptic scene along Highway 50 and South Lake Tahoe. So a tale from Mark Twain does have new meaning. Places like Tahoe have increasingly come under threat for a variety of reasons, and the environmental and economic implications loom large. How many more Caldor, Tamarack, Dixie fires are we going to endure each season? We have a panel of experts here with us today that I personally am fortunate enough to collaborate with on a wide range of climate issues, and that we'll touch on this. But before we begin, let's take a closer look at what's going on in Nevada and across the American West. So first, some good news. We've had success and getting a better understanding of what's going on with what contributes to climate change in Nevada, as well as with state policy, and having a good foundation that's gone through the legislature and through several governors over the past 20 years. Previous legislative sessions have prioritized shutting in-state coal-fired electric generation down, and NV Energy has done just that. Fort Mojave was the first in 2005 down in Laughlin about 20 years ago, but more recently, Reed Gardner, north of Las Vegas, was closed down ahead of schedule. The Navajo Generating Station, which provides power to NV Energy near Page, Arizona, was demolished. Coupled with an increasingly aggressive renewable portfolio standard, one that's now embedded both in statute and in our state constitution, Nevada's electric generation portfolio has certainly gotten cleaner. Nevada's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the result of a climate bill, reflects this reduction in emissions and reveals that the largest sector of emissions is now from transportation. This information is captured in the Nevada Climate Initiative, a comprehensive state climate strategy that recently wrapped up. Many of you have likely heard of this undertaking. We have Dr. Kristen Averyt here today to talk more about it and the mitigation efforts that are being taken by other local collaborators that are up here. Well, let's not forget where we started. Despite the state's progress, we're dealing with issues on a scale that's much larger than Nevada. It truly is global. So year over year, the American West has endured these new historic high temperatures and has found itself getting hotter. So several times this summer, we had heat watches, advisories, and warnings covering entire states, stretching from the deserts of California all the way up to Idaho. This, of course, puts the strains on other critical systems that we rely on, including the electrical grid. Many of you likely saw reports or had requests from NV Energy to shed load or to conserve power to prevent brownouts. This was the second summer in Las Vegas that we had to do this. While there are a number of factors involved regarding transmission and grid characteristics that cross interstate lines, we've been fortunate that NV Energy hasn't had massive widespread outages. The heat has impacted cities in a variety of ways, exacerbating the urban heat island effect in our major cities. Triple-digit records have been set in successive years all across the region. You know it's bad when Las Vegas is hotter than Phoenix. And who can forget hearing about parts of British Columbia reaching 120 degrees? This, of course, has the cascading effects leading to greater AC usage, need for cooling. But what about for residents that are less fortunate, that don't have good quality housing, or some of the other things that we talk about as planners? Environmental justice has certainly emerged in many cities across the West, and dealing with a homeless population and making sure that that our underprivileged communities certainly are able to cope with the extreme heat. With the changing climate comes a changing snowpack. We've seen dramatic changes in the amount of snowfall and watersheds we rely upon for municipal water and agricultural use. Alterations in snowmelt rates, water content of snow, and the rate of evaporation along our rivers, streams, lakes, and reservoirs are changing with great rapidity. These variations in snowpack are, of course, not just relegated to the Sierras. Millions on both sides of the Rockies rely on these water sources, and the vast majority of which is being used for agricultural production, but also for that municipal use that we depend on when we turn on the tap. And that's tremendous. That poses tremendous concerns for things like agricultural production and food supplies. Drought is the new normal, and not just for the Colorado River Basin or the Great Basin or the Central Valley of California. Atmospheric conditions and another La Nina season coming up means this is true for another year or more. This map is from earlier this month. A third of the country is in severe to exceptional drought, stretching between California to Minnesota. And that's caused our water supplies and our reservoirs to look like this. That's Lake Mead, where Vice President Harris is there right now and just announced a bill to deal with water shortages. 20 years ago, the nation's largest reservoir and second largest reservoir were completely full. And this is the dam, just a few weeks ago. It should come as no surprise to anyone that the Secretary of the Interior declared the first ever water shortage in the 100-year history of the Colorado River Compact. And what does that mean? Basically, upper basin and lower basin states were each allocated 7.5 million acre feet, as well as an allocation to Mexico, each divvied up between the states. Nevada has the smallest share of all of them at 300,000 acre feet. And though the compact and other laws of the river have set that in place, if the elevation of Lake Mead drops below 1075, an automatic cut in allocation goes into effect, as it just did. For Nevada, that means a cut of 21,000 acre feet. Not only that, SNWA has lost an intake to Lake Mead for its water supply, leaving 2 at lower depths for bringing water into the Las Vegas Valley. True, Southern Nevada Water Authority has led the way in water conservation and on return flow use, but this month, Lake was at 1067, and by the beginning of next year, it's projected to drop another foot. Although it's dry, that obviously hasn't meant no snow or no rain. Unfortunately, what we do get is rain that comes all at once. We have an active monsoon cycle in central and southern Nevada, and with impervious urban development, we've basically engineered a watershed. Cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix have to endure sudden, rapid flash and spot flooding like this. Those active storm seasons and dry conditions can often spark lightning-driven wildfires. Sometimes they're caused by high winds that can cause transmission lines to arc. No matter what the cause is, though, we've endured increasingly more active and destructive forest and rangeland wildfire seasons. With the right fuel and right conditions, we've seen fire threaten not only established towns and rural areas, but also suburban and newly developing communities. We heard about this firsthand from the community development director of the town of Paradise at our 2019 state conference in Sparks, which turned the town to ashes and resulted in millions in damages and dozens of lives lost. As the West is burned, the effects obviously don't go unnoticed. This was on the same day. Smoke from the same wildfires outside of Reno blew into Las Vegas 450 miles away. On the worst days this summer, I couldn't see the mountains less than a mile away from my house and heard of equally poor air quality conditions attributable to the Caldor and Dixie fires on broadcasts from Denver, 1,000 miles away. None of us has enjoyed any of this, I'm sure, right? The hazardous air quality conditions have had a major social impact, let alone the public health impact. And after an area burns, it won't take long for the aftermath to have an impact. This summer, I had to take a trip to Colorado and to Denver. And because of COVID, I drove the 775 miles from my house to the Denver area. In the middle of Utah, signs along I-15 started warning of I-70 closures in Colorado and to use alternate routes, some of which would have made an 11-hour drive into a 15 to 18-hour drive. The problem was at Glenwood Canyon, and that it's a beautiful area cut by the Colorado River. I-70 and the Union Pacific Railroad parallels it, and it has numerous tight curves and tunnels, but a wildfire caused a burn scar, and with monsoonal storms, massive mudslides covered I-70 at multiple locations. I got lucky and got through it, but a lot of people didn't. And you got situations like this, and due to road construction, the alternate routes weren't really good either. I-70 would close a number of times throughout the summer, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. And the Colorado Department of Transportation still doesn't have a good solution to prevent mudslides like this from happening. The point is, if a major highway and railway were closed, it's going to cause humongous impacts to the supply chain and to anybody who's traveling. And these are just a handful of examples. I mean, many other parts of the world that we haven't talked about have endured hazards that have been linked to or attributed to climate change. New York with the hurricanes and the flooding, the wildfires in Greece, so on and so forth. So given all this, the questions to our panelists is going to be, how are Nevadans currently collaborating on addressing this? How are we addressing climate action? And what can Nevada planners and landscape architects do to mitigate and adapt to a changing climate? Unfortunately, it's important to note that there are some answers to these questions, and APA does have resources for us to make use of in our practice. The Sustainable Communities Division has made climate a primary focus, and hence the desire for a focused topic credit for our AICP members. As you can see, the common theme of these efforts is collaboration, to work between chapters across the country and to provide resources to create sustainable, resilient, and equitable communities. So with that, we turn now to our panel. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kristen Averyt to discuss the Climate Initiative, Suzanne Groneman with City of Reno, who will talk about the Reno Climate Action Plan, Marci Henson with Clark County to discuss all in Clark County, Steele with NV Energy to discuss transportation electrification efforts, and a little bit more from me on what we're doing at the City of Las Vegas.
Well, thank you, Marco. I have to say, you did a very nice job presenting the science, and it's really nice to not have to be the one to talk about that, because it's always a little sobering, and I'm usually the one setting the stage as Debbie Downer. So thank you for filling that role this morning. So I am here to talk a little bit about what's really been happening at the state level as it relates to climate. So to provide a little bit of context, when Governor Sisolak took office, he said in his first State of the State that he would not spend a single second debating climate change. And he followed that up by committing Nevada to the U.S. Climate Alliance. The Climate Alliance is an organization of 25 different states across the U.S., representing over 50% of the U.S. population, and they're committed to achieving between 26 and 28% reductions in greenhouse gases by 2025, and that's relative to 2005, a 50 to 52% reduction by 2030, and net zero emissions by 2050. This was followed by a legislative session in 2019 that was fairly active with respect to climate. But there were two key pieces of the legislation that folks should be aware of. The first was SB 358. SB 358 set, an RPS for electricity generation in the state that 50% of all our electricity generated by 2030 will come from renewable energy. And then we'll have 100% by 2050. SB 254 was also passed later that year, and that set economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets for the state. These targets, 28% reduction by 2025, 45 by 2030, and net zero by 2050. This legislation also required that the Division of Environmental Protection issue a greenhouse gas inventory every year, and that inventory comes out in December. And the latest inventory actually shows that we will miss our greenhouse gas emission targets or emission reduction targets. We'll miss our 2025 target by roughly 4 to 5%, the next target by almost 20%, and we're going to fall well short of our net zero emissions reduction targets if we don't implement new policy. All right, so recognizing this, Governor Sisolak issued his executive order on climate change in late 2019. That executive order, the key milestone in that executive order was the creation of the state climate strategy, which was to be delivered on December 1st. Recognizing the need to really bring a lot of people around the table to be able to talk about climate and to contribute to the strategy, the governor also launched his the Nevada Climate Initiative, the NCI, and that was in August of 2020. The NCI mission to ensure a healthy, vibrant, climate resilient future for all Nevadans. So the NCI on December 1st, actually, of 2020, did issue the state climate strategy, and it was made available to the public. I will say it is a sweeping document, and that was necessary because the executive order is actually fairly comprehensive. The document is actually web-based, and you can find it at climatestrategy.nv.gov. And if we were to print it out, just to give you the scale of what's of the content, it's about 140 pages, single space, 10.5 font. And I'm sure everybody's looking forward to reading that tonight. But I want to highlight for this group 4 different sections of the strategy that I think are relevant and would be of interest. So the first section is about climate change in Nevada. This section was actually orchestrated and pulled together by a team of the top climate experts in the state, actually led by 2 of our scientists who are here, Dr. Steph McAfee back there, she's actually our state climatologist, as well as Dr. Tamara Wall from DRI. But the team was actually rounded out by folks from UNLV, DRI, and other people from UNR. And these experts really pulled together what is the first comprehensive climate assessment for the state of Nevada. What is the status? How has climate change impacted our state? And what do we have to look forward to in the future? And this document is also really going to be the basis for resilience planning and adaptation planning as we move forward. So I would really encourage you people to go talk to them if you have any questions about resilience planning with respect to risk and vulnerability in climate. Oh, that one, sorry. The next section is about monitoring, modeling, and managing greenhouse gases. This part of the strategy was pulled together by representatives from different organizations and entities across the state who are at some stage of creating a greenhouse gas inventory, whether they're considering it, they were in progress, or they're basically seasoned experts. That section has a lot of recommendations about how to really what we need to do at the state level and across municipalities to develop greenhouse gas inventories. But one of the key messages there is that we really need to make sure that we have a more robust greenhouse gas inventory capability across the entire state, and that we ensure that the different inventories can talk to one another, because the way that you count carbon actually matters. For example, if you have a city, county, something along those lines, that implements a policy because it's going to achieve a greenhouse gas emission reduction, that's great, and it might be captured in their inventory, but it might not be captured at the state level. And this is not a bean counting exercise necessarily. This is about policy. So for example, it might actually be better investment for the state to say, you know what, we need to invest in this county policy rather than implement our own, because we're going to get a greater bang for our proverbial buck. So I hope that makes sense. The next section is about complex climate challenges. Climate change is really hard. It's a difficult thing to deal with. And this section, it really lays out those complexities. It talks about the challenges, and it's framed around, sorry, it's really hard to talk with masks. This is my first presentation in person, and I'm like, it's doing all sorts of weird things. Anyways, so in this section, it's really framed around kind of the key economic sectors where we need to realize significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And it does integrate in resilience and adaptation issues, because when it comes to climate adaptation and mitigation, these two are not mutually exclusive. They have to be considered together. So this section really highlights why there's a need for collaboration across different jurisdictions to deal with climate. And the final section is climate governance. It's how do we need to be organized to make sure that we're working and we're collaborating and we're communicating across the entire state. Next. So with respect, we dropped the strategy, but there's been a lot of action and there's current action that's going on. The legislative session in 2021, there were a smattering of climate-related bills, but really the centerpiece was SB 448, which I know we'll hear more about from Marie later. But we're also moving forward with clean cars regulations in the state. Actually, on Friday is when the Legislative Commission will be hearing about clean cars. And beginning model year 2025, you should actually be able to purchase zero emission vehicles and low emission vehicles and find them at your auto dealers. You'll have more choice about what you can purchase. We also, of course, have electric highway, transportation electrification. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention NDOT. They are the first state agency that has actually created a lead by example policy where they are adopting greenhouse gas emission reduction policies in order to achieve net zero emissions in their operations. And I'll stop there.
So I will get started. I'm Suzanne with the City of Reno, and it is hard to breathe in these things, so that's why your voice starts to shake. I know, round of waters. So I'm gonna focus on what we're doing currently at the City of Reno, and then how we got here. So it's already starting. Our goal is to establish well-focused initiatives that promise to strengthen Reno's reputation as one of the world's leading cities while also improving the day-to-day quality of life for all of our residents. Next slide. So this is just an overview of our sustainability plan. We have 9 priority areas. Our first one being our operations. So operational efficiency. So that covers waste management, energy management, electric vehicles. So I don't oversee necessarily the implementation of those efforts. That's often housed with public works or capital projects, but I do oversee strategies and coordination of those efforts. And our other priorities affect the community. So transition to clean renewable energy, green islands, green building as a standard practice, create lively, low carbon neighborhoods towards zero waste, healthy, equitable urban forests, access to fresh, healthy foods, safeguard water resources, and strengthen climate resilience. She's like, there you go, help you out. So I wanted to highlight our strategic plan. This is our 2020 to 2025 strategic plan model. These are the efforts that have been adopted by our city council as being priorities in the city of Reno. And the reason that I highlight this, even though it's a separate plan, is I think it's important to find intersections in those plans and make sure that there's a common theme throughout. So I'm highlighting here infrastructure, climate change, and environmental sustainability as being one of our council's strategic plans as well. Next slide. So this, I put this together for this presentation, I'm calling us a resilient and adaptive community because of our operational and community planning efforts. When you look at operational planning around resiliency, we can think of the capital improvement projects, the actual boots on the ground efforts, but what we're gearing up towards, or what we're getting towards, is creating an environment for those that may have chronic societal or institutional inequities. So for example, and I categorize these by adaptation, wildfire mitigation and prevention. We don't often think of those as efforts towards sustainability or resilience. We do have wildfire mitigation and prevention ordinances in the city of Reno. They may not necessarily be captured under sustainability, but they do exist. Flood control, reducing flood hazards. We have an operational plan specifically around flooding in the city of Reno. Vegetation management, we're undergoing a vegetation management plan strategy right now. And then emergency preparedness. On critical infrastructure, maintaining delivery and improvement of water, capital investment in mission critical facilities, stormwater and wastewater management, and then water delivery. And all of those, of course, are leading us towards creating a resilient city, addressing affordable housing and homelessness, business retention, transportation, efforts like that. Next slide. So I want to give an example of sort of implementation. How do we go from a sustainability plan to actually implementing a project? Because there's a lot in our plan. If you've had a chance to read it, there's a lot. There's a lot of actions, there's a lot of goals, there's a lot of strategies. So how do we actually get to getting a project done? So the example that I'm giving here is a project that we just wrapped up, but actually it led us into another effort. So in 2019, we adopted our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. That involved a local and regional stakeholder process. I think at one point, one of our workshops, we had 120 people in the same room to sort of vet some of these efforts under this plan. Right now, I would say it serves as a guide toward implementation. I don't pick up the plan and say, tomorrow, let's do action 5.4B. But it definitely guides an overall effort at the city. And then I call it a keeper of statistics because I've gone back to this plan many times to apply for a grant, do a talk, coordinate an effort, and actually pulling some of those statistics out and then being able to either just update them or speak about them has really helped under our grant process. And then of course we revisit it often. So one of the efforts we're going through right now, what you may not know is the City of Reno is LEED certified. So we are a LEED certified city under LEED for cities and communities. So what we're doing right now is recertifying and trying to get to the level of silver, hopefully, or higher if we can, but our goal is silver. And then through this process, we've actually used this as a roadmap, community-wide roadmap to see where we're deficient as a community, not just as an operation, but in the entire community. And some of its actions we don't necessarily control. It might be something housed at Truckee Meadows Water Authority. And so we have to have those conversations that speak to them to reach those goals. It might be NV Energy. So we have to have those conversations. And then through that, we've identified resilience, renewables, and waste reduction as our primary goals. So again, that involves other local or regional bodies that we have to speak to move this effort along. So on the implementation on resilience, I thought a fun one to highlight would be our recent value of solar plus storage. So the process that we went through with this project is we won an award from the National Renewable Energy Lab. And our concept was you can value resilience. You can find maybe a monetary value of what does it offer a community by having a resilient facility, but then what do you do with that number? How do you actually use it to get a project done? So through that effort, we actually won another grant for microgrid implementation in our critical facilities. So we are now going from our value project to actual implementation, and then using that value to get the project done, to get better financing, and all those fun things. So that was a really exciting project. It's been going on for about 3 years now. Next slide. So strategies to address our gaps. Grants, we always are looking for grant opportunities. Some of them might be outside of the box. They might not say grant for sustainability effort. It might be an educational grant. It might be something in planning. It might be just setting up a strategy. So we're always looking for those opportunities. Various advisory committees that we sit on or that we speak to. We have a program called the Sustainable Building Coalition, which is an effort of the City of Reno, Northern Nevada Facility Managers Association, and then USGBC, Nevada chapter. So we do workshops and various educational or outreach through that effort. And then our voluntary programs. You can implement through policy and programs like code updates, master plan updates, special events, waste reduction. I have that one on there because we're trying to launch a program where essentially anybody that comes in to do a large event in the City of Reno would have to follow a specific waste reduction plan. And then our CPACE program, which is changing right now due to the last legislative session, updated that program. And CPACE is clean energy financing for new construction or large rehab projects. And then our internal stakeholder engagement, it's really important to understand the needs of other departments. I will sit down with our planning team and I won't say, do this, do this, do this. I'll say, how do we do this? What are your barriers? What were the conversations you had the last time we tried to do this? So it's really having those internal conversations and then addressing specific goals to establish really concise work plans. Next slide. So some takeaways on some partnership opportunities. They're everywhere. State government, we've kept that dialogue going with the state energy office, and that really helped us to get this last grant, which was actually a FEMA grant called Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. And then we were also part of the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Working Group under the State Climate Strategy. Other local governments, we've worked a lot with Marco on our CPACE program, the utility. We take advantage of the incentive programs. We speak up on the incentive programs. And then they were also involved in our NREL grant. And then the development community. What are the barriers? Are they willing to voluntarily adopt any actions? And then what tools do they need? And this conversation has been ongoing with the development community, but actually this week or next week, I'm attending a NAOP meeting, and they actually reached out to me and said, will you come to this meeting and just have a very real conversation about kind of the future on these topics? So I took that as a win. Next slide. So the takeaways, some of the must-dos, of course, understand your source of emissions. Like Dr. Averyt said, speak the same language. I think that's so important, especially as it starts to go back up to the state level. I think it's important to lead by example. I really believe in trying something first at the city before we reach out to you and say, do this thing. I can't tell all of you microgrids are going to save the planet unless we try it first and work through that process. Be transparent. So for example, we measure our emissions right now from operations, and that covers waste, fleet, energy, and then we are about to launch sort of a pass-through public portal where you'll be able to go on and see everything we're doing, and it changes every day. And so that'll be a really interesting and I think important piece for the community to see exactly how we're operating. And then setting measurable goals. For example, choose a goal like reduce single occupant commutes by 25%. A goal is not educate the community about reducing single occupant commutes. You can't measure that goal. So make sure they're measurable. Next slide. And then that's my contact information. You can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @RenoResilience. We also keep a blog on Around the Arch. So there's a lot of our operational efforts and community efforts that are also on our blog, or you can call me or email me. Thank you.
Sorry. It's all right. So a few quick things on what the city of Las Vegas has been doing. Our sustainability program has been around since 2006, where our Mayor Oscar Goodman signed on to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Protection Agreement, and that really set us up for these long-term investments in both municipal operations and community efforts in sustainability. The big missing piece, though, was initial funding to get us going. But right around 2008, we had the recession, and that was followed up with the Recovery Act. That really seeded our program, and we were able to take that initial set of money, whether through grants or bonds, or even the city special revenue funds that were available to us, to make these investments into renewable energy and energy efficiency throughout our jurisdiction. So some of the most noticeable features are our new our city hall. I mean, it was built one of our first buildings built to LEED standards, and we really embraced the green building rating system because it got us all the sustainability components that we were looking for. We were able to leverage NV Energy incentives, the Renewable Generations Program, for many years to install more than 6 megawatts of solar at 40 different facilities, community centers, fire stations, parks, many in the form of solar covered parking. We put in a 3 megawatt plant out at our wastewater treatment facility to offset one of the largest loads that the city of Las Vegas has. We made sure that we implemented recycling at all of our facilities, zero escape, and use a lot of water saving features throughout our parks where we have the largest use of water. We replaced sports fields with artificial turf. We have more than 55,000 streetlights throughout Las Vegas, and right off the bat, we were able to replace 37,000 of them, and then over time add batches of streetlights, taking out the old high pressure sodium and mercury vapor and putting in LED. All of these things have helped contribute to that original resolution from our city council to get to some of the goals that we were looking for, and it set us up for some larger big picture conversations. We ended up doing one of the largest power purchase agreements in the country with NV Energy to get 100% of our municipal load from renewable resources, and we continue that agreement on with NV Energy through the next couple of years, and it ended up translating to other jurisdictions and other large power consumers throughout the state. We've been able to take advantage of transportation electrification, and even more so, we have electric vehicle charging stations at many of our facilities, and we've continued on with that. Guiding us along the way was a rating system, Star Community, sustainability tracking and ranking, and that helped us measure some of the things that we wanted to look to, and ultimately that led to this resolution from our city council to go to develop a new master plan, which we'll talk about at another session later today. But essentially, it provided that guide for what comes next. Next slide. So what comes next was really developing this new master plan, and we paired that up with Lead for Cities, and Suzanne mentioned this a little bit, but we had an intentional alignment with that effort, and we have several members of the city here that helped work on that, but it was essentially using Lead to evaluate our existing conditions and where we wanted to go for the future to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and really help us better understand where the city stood, even after all the successes that we've had and all the things that we have done. We still wanted to have a better understanding of where we stood and compared to other cities across the country, and then what we continue to need to work on. We have some specific sustainability factors to Southern Nevada that required a bit more attention. So aligning it with our new master plan, which was done at the same time as Lead for Cities, allowed us to address things like water and some of the things I mentioned earlier, the climate threats that are specific to Southern Nevada, extreme heat, drought, flash flooding, and the cascading impacts to our economic sectors. With that, I'll turn it back over.
All right, it's me this time. Sorry, Marco, I apologize. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marci Henson. I'm the director of the Department of Environment and Sustainability for Clark County. And so I wanted to share with you all some of the work that we've been doing on climate and sustainability, and particularly highlight some of the many opportunities that we've had to collaborate regionally, which is really the only way we're going to meet these regional greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, feed into accomplishing the state's goals as well. So I wanted to say thank you to Michelle Laramie from RTC. She helped put this panel together. This was her brilliant idea, and she herded all of us cats and made this look amazing. So thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Next slide. Oh, no, that's fine. That's good. All right. So All in Clark County is the county's initiative to address and take on climate change and create a more sustainable future for all Southern Nevadans. We're focused on two primary objectives, and that's to reduce our contributions to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, and to prepare our residents and businesses for the impacts that we're already experiencing. And as Marco so impactfully shared with us, are going to get worse in the years to come. So we started on this effort after a couple of new Board of County Commissioners were elected to the county's board. So in the fall of 2019, we had Commissioner Justin Jones present. It was very Marco-esque. He presented to the Board of County Commissioners to try to raise this level to their consciousness and spark action among the commission to take on climate change and to improve the sustainability of not only county operations, but also our community. So they tasked our department with taking on this additional assignment. In addition to climate sustainability, we serve as the air pollution control agency for Southern Nevada, which is really handy when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And we also do federal endangered species compliance. We help the community comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. So we had this task added to our list of things to do, and there were some requests from the board. One was to do a sustainability audit of our operations, and then hire a sustainability administrator, and also do a sustainability and climate action plan. And we had some pretty tight timelines associated with that. As you can all see, time is of the essence. We've wasted a few decades doing not much, and so now we're sort of out of time and have to move very quickly. So this slide here gives you a sort of an overall timeline of what we've been working on. We did our sustainability audit to look at county operations. We then prepared an internal operations plan that I'll share a little bit more about in terms of the detail and what that might look like if your organization's interested in doing something like that. And then for the regional or the community-wide plan, we initiated an update of the Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition's greenhouse gas emissions inventory that hadn't been updated since 2014. And we need to look at it more locally. We do have some differences at the local level than what Dr. Averyt's greenhouse gas emissions inventory concluded for the state level. And that's not uncommon. And it just emphasizes again, the need to get into that granular level at the local municipality and feed that up into the state's goals to make sure that we're actually going to accomplish the results that we're looking for. We're also doing climate vulnerability assessment. That's wrapping up right about now to look at the particular weaknesses in both our physical infrastructure and also our human infrastructure in Southern Nevada. This has been a really interesting approach. We've got a lot of not to malign engineers. My father's an engineer, so I love them dearly. But we've heard a lot about, well, we always get flash floods here. And it's hot. Like, you know, what could possibly be worse? And I think finally in the last couple of years, as Marco has explained, that has become sort of front and center, and people are experiencing and perceiving, if not realizing, that it is very different. We're having some different impacts in Southern Nevada than we've had in the past. And then all of that is building into this larger community-wide plan. Again, that's going to be a little bit more externally facing. So we're kicking that off right about now. And we're going to focus in that planning effort on clean renewable energy, connected and regional mobility, equitable mobility as well, a diverse and circular economy, sustainable water systems, a resilient and healthy community, and then also smart buildings and development. So a little bit of a more external facing set of actions that we have there. But to just share with you a little bit more about the operations plan, we've heard a lot today about leading by example. I think Clark County agrees with that sentiment that we're hearing both from the state and from the City of Reno that we really need to walk the talk. And so that's why we started off with our internal operations plan. So you can Google All in Clark County, find our operations plan. The focus of that plan was energy, resilient operations, again, looking at some of the services and infrastructure that we build and maintain for Southern Nevada, smart waste management and reduction, something that we really need to work on in Clark County, sustainable transportation in our own operations, and then water conservation and protection. So the way the plan is laid out is to identify some big overarching goals, sort of our guiding north, if you will, and then to sort of break that down into more measurable targets. So we've heard a lot about that already too. You can't do what you don't measure. We've heard that many, many times. And so we quantify both our baseline and then short-term targets and long-term targets that we're working towards, so that we can measure, track this information and report it out. We have a public-facing dashboard, so you can also find this on our website. And this will be, again, we've heard about transparency and the importance of making sure that folks know what you're working on and what you're accomplishing with regard to your greenhouse gas emissions and your sustainability efforts. So we are also doing this for all of our plan areas for the county operations plan. And we'll be doing this for the sustainability or for the sustainable community-wide plan as well. So our next steps are to finish the regional greenhouse gas inventory. That's wrapping up right now. We're taking feedback from a variety of folks that have participated in that planning process. That has been a big regional effort in and of itself. We've had local governments, the utilities, folks from business and industry. The state has been involved on helping inform that inventory and make sure that we've been able to collect the data that we need, do the analysis, report out on the findings, and then educate ourselves on what we're finding and where we're getting greenhouse gas emissions from in Southern Nevada. For unincorporated Clark County, it's a little bit flipped. We're having more emissions coming from building energy use than transportation at the moment. That has to do with some of those big fancy lights down on the Las Vegas Strip. But transportation is close behind there. We know that's going to be an important area for us to emphasize and work on. And we need to finish the climate vulnerability assessment, report out, start educating the community on that. And then, as I mentioned, we're kicking off the community-wide sustainability and climate plan. And we've just initiated some stakeholder outreach. We have I think there have been 90 invitations sent out, one rep per 90 organizations to participate in an advisory group. And then we'll have a host of other engagement opportunities. Some including surveys, some events, some focus groups. So there'll be lots of opportunity to get the community engaged as well as more formal partners. And then we will also be working on exploring opportunities to work with all of our local partners on how we want to do climate and sustainability work together in the future. And that's sort of the focus of this panel. There's so many opportunities, and we're using all of these efforts that we're doing, whether it's a regional greenhouse gas inventory or the climate vulnerability assessment, to really reconnect with folks and to strengthen those relationships, build trust in some areas. We can be a bit competitive with our municipal partners there in Southern Nevada, and we got to get past that. Now is not the time for that. So, we're trying to set aside whatever differences we may have had in the past and realize that we all have to work together on this. And it's been a great effort so far, and we really appreciate all of our partners in that. So moving forward, one of the other things we're going to be looking at is climate governance, and we've heard a little bit about that this morning. So, how do we position all of Southern Nevada, all of Clark County, and all of our local government partners and all of our residents to benefit from the outcomes of these planning efforts? And then how do we seize on funding opportunities that may be coming from Washington, D.C. or from the state level? This is expensive work, and we need to make sure that we are putting our best foot forward and putting regional proposals together. They're going to attract the attention and the funding that we need to implement these actions. So we're looking at models that have been used in other parts of the country, and looking at, what can we do together? How do we want to shape this and form this and implement these actions in a way that work together? So not only implementing the plans that we're working on, but how do we incorporate Marco's work and the City of Las Vegas's work, and our other agency members, whether it's Southern Nevada Water Authority, the utilities, all of these folks. How do we shape what we want to be when we grow up, and how we're going to implement these actions in a way that's most effective for all of us? So I want to point out Kim Lundgren, Kim Wave. She is Kim Lundgren and Associates is our consultant who's helping us with all of these efforts. And they have also brought in a climate governance expert, Farallon Strategies. And we're looking at models from across the country and what's worked and what hasn't worked, and how do we grow and build upon those efforts, learn from those efforts, and put something in place that might work really well for Southern Nevada, and be able to be a really good, effective partner with the state. So I wanted to get into a more specific example of what that might look like in terms of regional collaboration. As I've mentioned, greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the climate vulnerability assessment, those are regional levels as well, but the actual implementation of these actions is going to be key in terms of working together. So we know that greenhouse gas emissions are being hugely influenced by transportation in Southern Nevada. And we know that'll be an outcome of this community-wide planning effort. And since we are sort of out of time, we're jumping ahead. We had a commissioner who was interested in maybe adopting an ordinance requiring electric vehicle infrastructure in new building. And so me being dumb and optimistic, I thought, well, how hard can that be? That's like a 2-page ordinance. And then we educated ourselves and had some meetings and discussions and realized that much more difficult, and it's going to take a regional effort to make this happen. So we're looking at what do we require in new buildings, and what would be the equipment necessary to install? How far do we want to go in making sites ready for EV infrastructure versus having it all built out? And so one of the first things we did is to hold a staff workshop so that we could learn a little bit more about what was involved in this. And what we've heard so far is that there's no lead authority for transportation electrification, which I was really counting on. I was really counting on somebody just waving a magic wand and saying, this is how you do it. And unfortunately, that's going to be us. So we are going to be the lead transportation electrification authority for Southern Nevada. One of the other things that we learned is, even though we've all got these plans for electrification of transportation, it's complicated, and there's a lot of moving pieces and parts with regard to energy load and planning and delivery. And so we need to be working in lockstep with our utility to make sure that they have the information they need to make sure that we have this additional electrical capacity where we need it, when we need it by. So we learned that, we're going to need to work together on this and make sure that we're shaping policy that they can help us deliver the infrastructure for the time and place that we need it. We also learned from the building community, both NAIOP and Southern Nevada Home Builders Association, that it's really easy to summarize the costs at the parcel level, but that there are sort of upstream costs associated with how we pay for electrical infrastructure, that sometimes they bear a pretty substantive portion of the cost of, and that we needed to be more transparent about that and make sure that we were providing a full understanding to the development community about what this might cost as we were going to roll out a policy on this. And that led into understanding a little bit more about some of the constraints that the Public Utilities Commission has on our utility about how that infrastructure gets paid for and how those costs get distributed through the system. And that even though there's a lot of community benefits of electrification of transportation, those aren't necessarily yet completely well distributed in terms of the cost, and making sure that one sector isn't disproportionately impacted by paying for what we all are going to benefit from. So learning and working a little bit more on that and understanding how those regulations might impact these discussions. And then a desire for consistency. We all hear this all the time from the development community. The builders don't necessarily want to have a different standard in the city of Las Vegas for building infrastructure for electric vehicles than we have in Clark County. And the utility doesn't want to plan for different requirements from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so once we had this good information, we then started sort of shopping the idea, socializing the idea of this being another area where we could work together regionally on maybe a model ordinance and work together on this infrastructure planning and learning a little bit more about what the projected demand for charging will be, where we need to put it, what's currently available, and then how we would pay for this. So we've been shopping an idea to put together a regional transportation electrification working group that would include all of the municipalities, utility, some of the nonprofits, environmental nonprofits, and then also folks from the development community, so that we can work together on providing this information to our community and to our elected officials as we move forward in these sorts of discussions. That's just one example. All right, that's it.
Thank you, Marci. So good morning, everybody. Marie Steele, Director of Electrification for NV Energy. And I am very fortunate to be up here with some folks that are stakeholders, also customers, but not just that, colleagues and friends. And when I do this work, you know, and talking with my friends across the country and also globally, they wonder how we pulled off some of the things that we pulled off, quite frankly, years ago, before people even starting to think about it. And it's because we have this collaborative community. It's definitely my favorite part of Nevada, that we call and be like, hey, Marci, I got this wild idea. How are we going to figure it out? And I am brag on all of these folks on this table every chance I get, anytime I'm by myself. So it's really fortunate to be up here with all of you. So today, I just wanted to talk briefly, because I know actually we were thinking we couldn't fill this time, and here we are an hour in. So I do want to go through NV Energy quickly, because I know you folks have a ton of questions. For those of you in the room that may not be from here, NV Energy is obviously the electric provider for 90% of the state. We are the one investor-owned utility and serve the natural gas, obviously in the Reno Sparks area as well. Have a 1.5 million customers, and then serve the tourist population of 56 million annually. 2,400 employees, but really what's exciting for us to share, you know, when we talk about all these partnerships that we've had, customers are paying 10% less than they were in 2009, with almost 850% more renewable energy. So I joined the Renewable Energy Strategy Group, oh gosh, in like 2013, and really have loved every minute of it. The creativity around sustainability has been fun. So right now I lead our electrification strategy. Today I'm going to focus on transportation, but as you can imagine, we'll soon be talking about the built environment and industry and decarbonizing that, and the codes that are going to be required for that as well. So as Dr. Averyt said, 2021 legislative session was pretty big around the energy policy. And Senate Bill 448, our favorite energy omnibus bill, did a whole host of things. Yeah, that one will be etched. You'll remember 448 for forever. But it really, you know, the clean energy economy, not just carbon reduction, but Nevada has such amazing potential around doing so much for not just our economy, climate justice, and also our environment, which is incredibly important. So one, it also, from a transmission perspective, developing the Green Link project and a regional transportation organization and an advisory committee for that to regionally collaborate for energy needs is very important. I'll focus mostly on transportation electrification today. An increase for energy efficiency for low income and historically underserved communities. A big piece of this legislation, which was really helpful, it defined historically underserved communities in our transportation piece and also in our energy efficiency and conservation, so that we know where we're focusing and can really measure it, right? So now we know where we're targeting our efforts. Additionally, it expanded rooftop solar and multifamily buildings. We have a resource planning requirement around carbon reduction, expanding energy storage, and then economic development rate rider program. Another one that was about 200 pages long, and I'm sure most of you know about it potentially. So just so you know, transportation electrification, it might not be news to any of you in here. You know, we did recent market research on our customers, whether they're residential or commercial, and how we think transportation electrification is going to happen. 24% of our customers say their next vehicle will be electric. Another 28% say they're neutral on the topic. So when you think of that, that's 50% of your residential customers are thinking about their next car being electric. So it's really important that the work that we're doing around planning for that and the county taking this on is pretty critical. You know, when we think of our barriers to electric vehicle adoption, I don't think it's news to anybody in here. Definitely price parity is a big concern, but I think we're going to see that change here pretty quickly with a ton of the work of the federal administration. But really on the residential and commercial perspective, that need for infrastructure. You know, if you can charge at home, you will get an electric vehicle. And then we also need to focus on the necessary public infrastructure for the folks that can't charge at home. And so that's what we're really focused on, and what came out of Senate Bill 448 is really focusing on infrastructure that's necessary to meet the needs of transportation electrification and the carbon reduction goals. So our history in electric vehicle infrastructure, you know, we started in 2013 with our charging station shared investment program with partners with everybody across this table and deploying infrastructure to make sure that people had charging stations back in 2013. In 2015, we created the Nevada Electric Highway with the Governor's Office of Energy and the Rural Electric Associations, something that we should be incredibly proud of. So this will be finished this year. We got some long stragglers with some interesting issues in rural areas. But when we think of the national conversation, people are starting to sign memorandums of understanding to think about this. Nevada has it done. And we're starting now to incrementally add to infrastructure where additional capacity is needed. So that's a great planning story of state efforts, local efforts to make sure that the infrastructure that we need is there. In 2017, we created the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Demonstration Program out of Senate Bill 145, and that's our current program. So we have a whole host of incentives around charging infrastructure for fleets, public, workplace, as well. Our new one this year that we're really excited about is the residential charger. So we have a residential charger incentive. And then additionally, next year, starting in January, where it used to be in a couple months and now it's almost here, we have an incentive for a lower income electric vehicle incentive. So that's for the vehicle. So we're really trying to break down those barriers to electric vehicle adoption for low income customers and creating access to the clean energy economy for everyone. A huge focus of ours is that environmental justice piece. And then as well, we have our electric school bus program, which was created out of Senate Bill 299 in the 2019 session, that helps the school districts evaluate school buses. And we partner with NDEP, and they have additional funding from Volkswagen funding. So we have that partnership to have 100% of the project covered. So another great collaboration piece. If you want to know anything more about this, it's nvenergy.com/EV. So this is where we are today. What's very exciting in Senate Bill 448, it did two things around transportation electrification. It created the Economic Recovery Transportation Electrification Plan. We just filed that on September 1st. It's with the Public Utilities Commission, which I've had the great fortune of teaching Marci all about the Public Utilities Commission. And that will have a ruling by November 30th. So hopefully we'll be working on that infrastructure starting in January of 2022. It additionally created a transportation electrification plan as part of our distributed resource plan. And so this will be our transportation electrification program going on in perpetuity. So that one, we will file our first plan in September 1st of 2022. It addresses residential charging, multifamily charging, how we plan for it. So that has a rulemaking soon, and then we'll have stakeholder engagement as well. Again, as well, working with the built environment and builders, we want to make sure that we're addressing all of the needs. So the economic recovery plan, just so you know, I promise this is my last slide as well. It focused on 5 things, and that came out of the legislation. Interstate corridor charging, urban charging depots, the public agency electric vehicle charging. We chose to focus on public charging there around community centers, colleges and universities, and then in the state capitals. It has a transit custom grant program to serve the needs of our transit agencies, a school bus program where we propose to create an electric vehicle to grid trial for school buses to see if we can make that a grid resource. If you think about it from the perspective, school buses are parked exactly when the grid needs it. So we're hoping to make that actually an additional use case for those school buses. And then as lastly, we created an outdoor recreation and tourism program. And so proposed 2 iconic projects, one in Southern Nevada at Red Rock, one in Northern Nevada here at Tahoe, including multimodal charging with boats and bikes and cars. And so it'll be really fun to test out the new technologies. And then a suite of incentives around to create an e-tourism economy, making sure that folks can get to all of their favorite places like ski locations, sporting arenas, resorts and casinos, rural tourism. And from this, you know, we were a part of the requirement was 40% to historically underserved communities. Like we talked about that, those are now defined. And then even in our proposal, we proposed a minimum of 51%, really making sure that infrastructure is serving the needs of the folks that need it most. So I think that is it for me, and I will hand that back.
All right, thank you all for sharing these successes and how we're working with our regional partners. I do want to open it up for audience questions, but before we do that, a few for the panel, just some general questions to those who want to take them. We talked about a lot of the successes, and we've had, you know, the examples of electrification, working City of Las Vegas, the City of Reno on a CPACE program, participating with Clark County on the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, making use of the climate initiative, making use of the of NV Energy's incentive programs, current and upcoming. But what have some of the obstacles been to regional collaboration? What have some of the things that have come up as stumbling blocks that maybe weren't anticipated?
So I'll answer that one. I think what you find when you get in a room with even this group is you all speak a different language. You may be more technical. Your background may be science. Your background may be policy. And so trying to mediate those voices. Sometimes you need that person in the room that is almost like a mediator. It's like, I understand what you said. It kind of goes with what you're saying about. So just, I think that's for us, like there's delays just in like getting everybody on the same page and speaking the same language and understanding the part that they're passionate about and then how you implement the part that they're passionate about. So for us, that's definitely a barrier. There's many, but that's one that comes to mind.
I mean, I think, yeah, as Nevadans, we have limited resources, whether they're human or financial. And so I think when we get to work with all of you and having the same priorities and where you want funding to go sometimes really is a struggle, just given in our limited resources. It's never the desire to get it done. It's where you want to allocate that capital, whether it's financial or human.
So, so as with the other Sunbelt states, some of the projections we've seen from UNLV, from the Center for Business and Economic Research, from the University of Nevada, Reno, from the Nevada Demographer's Office, the regional consensus estimates all point to dramatic population growth despite the climate risks and vulnerabilities. So what's your response to those who say enough is enough with all the growth given what's going on?
If it were only that easy. That's something that when Kim's team came on, we had some really good discussions about that. We're trying to respond to this changing climate and these current and future threats in an environment where we're expected to add another 800,000 people by 2060. We hear that a lot. We hear that a lot in our public engagement processes and in op-eds in the local papers. And, our challenge is that we have to accommodate those folks that are coming because they're coming, and we don't have a mechanism to tell them that they can't. They want to come for jobs. They want to come to reconnect with family who's already moved to Southern Nevada. And so we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to accommodate that population while improving the sustainability of our community, educating folks and preparing them to be more resilient in the face of these impacts and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a great track record of doing that in Southern Nevada, both in terms of air quality. We've seen huge reductions in PM10, PM2.5, ozone while growing our population. And it's the same on water conservation. We use less water per person per day now than we did 20 years ago, adding hundreds of thousands of people. So we know how to do this. It makes it more challenging for sure, but we don't have the luxury of just telling people they can't come. We have to figure out how to accommodate that increase in population while achieving all these goals that we've set forward.
I mean, let's face it, there's more people on the planet. So most places are growing. Very few are actually shrinking. Yes, we are growing faster than other places, and pointing out the jobs connection is really important. I think there's been this dialogue that economic development is mutually exclusive with respect to actually achieving climate goals, but that is not the case anymore. And we have a unique opportunity in this state to really diversify our economy and grow our economy. I hate these masks, I'm sorry, around these particular issues. And so we do, and we have the capability to accommodate more people. We have to be smart about how we grow. And I just want to make a comment that we have really focused on transportation electrification here, but it is not just about reducing, emissions through electrification. It's about reducing VMTs. It's VMT that are actually deriving the increase in greenhouse gas emissions around transportation in our state. So we need to be thinking about mass transit. We need to be thinking about walkability when it's not 120 degrees out, and figure out how we can really just get people off the roads writ large.
So as mentioned, Vice President Harris was in Southern Nevada down at Lake Mead. Is there anything that any of you are watching for at the federal level, assuming Congress can move anything through, that might provide a boon to sustainability efforts in our state or in our local communities?
Yeah, I think they need to lead on the policy front and on the funding front. So one of the hallmarks of the Clean Air Act is that idea of cooperative federalism, that the federal government and state and local governments work together on reducing emissions. And we need those emissions to include greenhouse gas emissions. And then we need funding support to implement the actions that will improve our air quality, reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So there's obviously, I think, a tremendous amount happening at the federal level relative to what we've seen in the past. The infrastructure bill, as it stands, has like $7.5 billion, I think, for electrification infrastructure across the U.S. We have an opportunity to really capitalize on that. There are a lot of different things happening now at the White House level with respect to climate. And I would just say the conversation that we're having here with respect to the state and working with municipalities, the utilities, et cetera, we're having those exact same conversations with the different agencies at the federal levels and with the White House and the state. For example, just last week, we were having a conversation with other states about their greenhouse gas inventories with the EPA about how they're counting carbon. And we're having the exact same challenges that we're having within the state. So this is really, again, about everybody trying to figure out how to play in the sandbox to reach those mutual goals. But there is a tremendous amount happening. It's really hard to keep track of at this point, which is good.
I'm going to speak really quickly since there's representation from across the state. With infrastructure money, more flexibility on population versus geography. Prime example, FEMA infrastructure money, at least for the building resiliency or building resilient infrastructure and communities program. They look at statewide adoption of building codes and energy codes when they determine where you rank in getting those funds. Well, Vegas is great. Reno's doing great. Other places in the state, they're so small, they don't have a lot of people. They're not up to the level that that FEMA is looking for to give us points for that money. So we could potentially not get infrastructure money, even though we're ready. We have a project primed. So I think having those conversations and being more flexible, and these outlying areas in Nevada, looking at maybe what they can do to bring the whole state up and help the whole state.
We had the full spectrum of the planning process kind of on display here, from goal and policy development to plan development to outreach and collaboration and implementation. But as a practitioner for each of you, what's the one sustainability or resilience issue you'd like the planners and landscape architects in this room to devote more time on?
Anybody?
Okay, I will go. I'll go again. Here we go. We're in Reno, so let's talk about Reno. So I think just in general, being more open to some of the conversations, and then not thinking of like your sustainability person, speaking for myself, as being on an island or being not having the same goals that you have. We're not always on an island. At least I think for me, I try to look at how we can integrate, but also just even education. I've gone to our planning team and said, oh, can we take up this ordinance? They say, oh, that's not really our department, Oh, okay, so who does that? When I first started the city, I actually said, okay, so who writes this ordinance for me or checks it? And they were like, what are you talking about? You do it, you do it yourself. I said, oh, okay. So I think just keeping the conversation alive and and finding common ground to reach some of these goals and educating. I'm open to education, but I also hope that my planning team's open to education as well.
I'll just go. So there's this phrase in water management that stationarity is dead with our water management. And it was because water managers were really planning for the future based on the experience in the past. And water management has really moved beyond that. And that's the way planning writ large has to go. We can't think about anything that we've experienced in the past as being an analog for anything that we could possibly come in the future. We truly do need to look at like what Marco was talking about. We do need to understand what the science tells us the future what could happen, because planning is different. It's a different approach, and we really need to think about how we do things quite differently.
Well, we're very fortunate at Clark County. We have a great partnership with Department of Comprehensive Planning. A couple of my colleagues I see in the audience today, Garrett and Jared. And we're lucky enough to be able to take up all of this sustainability and climate planning at the same time that we were completely overhauling the county's master plan and just taking a completely different approach, much more modern, progressive in terms of planning approach to the master plan, and then also moving right into completely overhauling the development code. And so that project is called Transform Clark County because literally it will be transformative. They've had a great collaborative process with the community, with other departments in Clark County, including ours. They've been completely open to all of the feedback that we've provided. Kim's team has been in on some of those meetings and helped us comment on those documents as well. And we found them to be really great partners. And so I would just, encourage my specific colleagues here and other planning professionals. I think it is a bit of a new day. I think the elected officials are appreciating that. And so, some of the things that maybe professional planners have tried to kind of stick their neck out on in the past and didn't receive a lot of support. I think there's some paradigm shifting going on, and, let's work together and be brave, and let's see how far we can get on implementation of some of these actions together.
I mean, I think it's also, Marci and I experienced it with the electric vehicle infrastructure. As we look at decarbonizing the entire economy, understanding how complex that's going to be and how much planning has to happen with, whichever fuel provider, but when you think about the electrification of it, how we plan and the distribution of costs of that infrastructure really needs to be thought of when we start to think of these building codes. And so I would, understanding the complexity of some of these sustainability goals really, planning for the infrastructure is just really required.
So at this time, if there's anybody in the audience who has a question for any of the panelists, and if we have, we also, anybody who's online who'd like to submit a question, please type it in the chat box. One question that we have right now: how are we going to balance the higher cost of green building with the need for affordable housing?
I'll go again. I love this topic because, and in fact, one of the panels I sat in on yesterday, they were talking about rents in this market and how data is showing individuals can't afford rents. And the first question I wrote down, and unfortunately we were short on time, was, is that just the housing cost, or is that other costs associated with where individuals live? And there's actually not so much here, but in places like Denver, there's actually hospitals investing in green building because, or hospital groups like Kaiser investing in green building because they're finding that individuals incur fewer medical expenses if they live in safe, healthy, efficient housing. And so I think that they have to stop being viewed separately. Green building, it shouldn't be, do we get to build green or do we get to build affordable? It should be, how do we do both? And it's not necessarily more expensive. A lot of folks think, when they think green building, they think LEED. And I'm not knocking LEED at all, but it can be more expensive when you go LEED, but then there's later costs that are less expensive. And so I think it's just breaking down those barriers and no longer separating the two and having that conversation. If large hospital chains like Kaiser are investing in green building, why? They're a lot smarter than me on the financial side. So why are they doing that?
Yeah, when the county was looking at prioritizing its ARPA money, obviously affordable housing was a huge priority that came out of that planning process. And so one of the first things our team did was take an opportunity to prepare a memo for our elected officials and our folks in community services on integrating these kinds of principles into those projects. So looking at every opportunity that you have, how can we integrate these requirements, and educating your partners and your peers in your organization that when you look at these kinds of requirements as compared to the overall cost of the project, it's really diminutive. That is proven in the literature over and over and over again. There's lots of resources. So when you're taking an opportunity to make those recommendations, also make sure you're educating your organization and using that literature as your evidence of why it makes sense. And so, I think the point being made about the total cost of home ownership, and not just that, that monthly rent, but all of the costs associated with that housing product and what that means for the residents, can really level the playing field.
And there was a follow-up to that. How do you convince developers because they don't incur the long-term costs?
I don't know. I'm a kind of person because we said so. No, I'm kidding. I mean, some of it is requiring it. Kim wants to answer. What's your expertise, Kim? Say here.
So coming from out of state and working in a lot of states in this country, there are plenty of places that require these things. And a lot of your developers are national and they work in those places and they meet those standards there. Why aren't we making them meet them here? Nevada deserves better. We deserve better. And the reality is when we're building to green standards, if you look across the board, across the country, you're looking at less than 1% of additional costs. And that's not just green, that's net zero. Getting to net zero is less than 1% of additional costs. It is not significant, and there's so many more incentives coming to make it even less so. I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen in the development community. And I also think there's a lot of political will that needs to go out there in this state to say, we deserve better. These homes are more efficient. That means cheaper utility costs, more affordable. It's healthier, as we've heard. There's just so many benefits out there. It really is in the best interest of the state.
We have other questions for the audience. We have time for maybe one or two more. Mike and Mike.
So at the beginning, there was the intro with the U.S. Climate Alliance, and I noticed there's 25 states, and there's 50 in the country. My biggest concern, have your house in order before you recommend what your neighbor does, but Arizona, Utah, and Idaho are border states, and I would hate to see them have some kind of competitive leverage that they're offering come to Utah because we love coal, or build in Arizona because we're not hard. Is there some kind of savvy state line strategy to start talking to at least the counties to get these states towards what's a common good, common interest?
So I appreciate that. And I think one of the things, you're right, absolutely. It is 25 US states at this point, there are 50, but we're also seeing federal movement and federal commitments. And so this, again, there won't be a choice necessarily for certain states to come along. I will also just say that in general, the markets are moving in such a way that we're going towards electric vehicles, for example. We are definitely seeing a change in terms of the energy mix. There are a lot of different things there. I would also just mention, if you talk to the economic development authorities, particularly in Reno, a lot of the companies that are coming here have basically sustainability as part of their corporate ethos. And so that kind of next generation of businesses that we're attracting to the state for economic development really at their core value sustainability and are kind of stewards of climate and understand what's happening. And I think that's a generational shift. So I do think that we will see a sea change from external drivers, but the county to county, I can't speak.
Yeah, we haven't engaged a lot of the other counties on that kind of discussion yet. I can just tell you, we do spend a lot of time with our economic development team, just making sure that we are educating potential business and industry that want to come here about the overall competitive edge of Nevada and Clark County in particular. And we blow most of those other counties out of the water for, for a lot of reasons. So you really have to kind of give them the whole picture. And I totally agree with Kristen that both in the automotive market and the housing market, as Kim said, a lot of these builders build in these other counties. And in some cases, they're offering those products as standard features in some of their homes. And then even in Southern Nevada, we're seeing a lot of those builders are starting to at least offer them as options because the market is driving that request by consumers. And so, I don't think we're that far off from those kinds of things balancing back out again.
All right. I'd like to thank our panelists. Everyone, please, a round of applause. I'd also like to thank Michelle Laramie with the RTC for helping to organize this. Again, I think we're all available for questions afterward. We're moving on now to our next set of sessions and mobile sessions. And thank you and have a great rest of your day.